Hello and welcome to the DMPL Podcast, our special AViD edition podcasts. I'm Aaron Gernes, your host, and Gregg Hurwitz is here today. Gregg Hurwitz is the author of the Orphan X series, the latest one. Lone Wolf came out earlier this year, and he's going to be here with his friend Nick Petrie on Thursday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. at the Central Library. A couple of great thriller action writers come into the library to talk about their books. Gregg, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to coming out there to see y'all.
Yeah, have you been in Iowa before?
I have not. I haven't spent a lot of time there. I've been in and out a few times.
All right. Well, hopefully we can get you and Nick down here and having a fun time on Thursday, May 2nd. This is kind of a special AViD event. It's a little bit unique. We usually don't have two authors like this together, especially two pretty well-known authors, I'd say. So can you talk a little bit about your friendship with Nick Petrie and why you guys are hitting the road together and coming to Des Moines together for this event?
Well, Nick and I go back, I think it was his second book. I was at a bookstore in Scottsdale called The Poison Pen. That's one of the biggest mystery bookstores in the country, maybe even in the world. And Barbara Peters, who's the owner, said to me, there's this new writer, young in his career, who's just a terrific thriller writer, said, you've got to take this and take it home. And she's done that from time to time when I go through there on tour. And that was Burning Bright by Nick Petrie. I read it. I really liked it a lot. He reached out. I think I blurbed one of his books at some point, and we just had a friendship that developed, and I wound up going to his hometown a while later, and he interviewed me at a bookstore. And there's a lot of overlap in the crime fiction community, and it's one of the really nice parts about thriller and crime writers. As awful as we are on the page, we tend to be fairly affable in person. So yeah, we've just gotten along pretty well. I'm looking forward to seeing him there.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about that? I saw this past weekend you were actually doing a little crime writer talk at the LA Festival of Books, and there are some other fun names there: Eric LaSalle, Tracy Clark, Lee Goldberg, and I believe Daniel Wiseman was the other one. So what is it about crime writers that seems to like bring you guys together, or you all together, I should say?
I think we get all of our aggression and toxicity and rage out on the page. And so we tend to be a lot nicer in person because we're constantly sublimating everything. I don't know what it is. It's a great community. I mean, when I was first breaking in, I got blurbs and support from Baldacci and Lee Child and Robert Crace and Michael Connolly and Sue Grafton, and it's a very welcoming community. I've been the co-president for a while now of International Thriller Writers. We have a conference every year in New York called Thriller Fest, which is a lot of fun, and we do a lot of programs and outreach and support for younger thriller writers, people starting out in their career. We showcase a lot of big talent. This year, I'm going to be interviewing Dennis Lehane as he's going to be one of our thriller masters. He's somebody else who blurbed me and helped me earlier in my career. So I think it's just a very good tradition of kind of paying it forward. And I think because we are a commercial genre, we really feel like a rising tide lifts all boats, that the more people are reading and hooked on reading, the more that they read. So it tends not to be too competitive.
Yeah, I think actually that's a really fun point, because I have a friend that recently told me that probably about 5-6 years ago, one of his buddies got him into you for the first time. That was one of the first books he's picked up in a while that wasn't like a nonfiction book, something that he was just reading for fun, and he burned through all your books, and then next thing you know, he's reading a lot of the other big names, like you said, like the Baldaccis out there and the Childs, and he's there's always a action book on his Kindle, he says, so he's always looking for the next one. And yeah, you were the one that got him into it, back into it. He said, when I told him that you were coming to Des Moines, we were together a month and a half ago, and when I told him that you were coming to Des Moines, he's like, Gregg Hurwitz? He's like, Orphan X? He's like, I love Gregg Hurwitz. So
terrific. Well, you'll have to send him my best, and I'm glad, we can all serve as gateway drugs for other authors.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I told him about Nick Petrie, and I was like, that's Gregg's buddy, he's coming down. So I know he went to look up Nick's books, and I think he started reading them. So it's a really cool genre. And like you said, rising tide lifting all boats. And it's, I think, a unique genre in that, like, I guess when you guys get together, do you talk about structure and how do you help each other out? Do you kind of give feedback to each other back and forth? I mean, you got blurbs back and forth, you exchange pages, that sort of thing.
I don't as much in that regard in terms of exchanging pages. I know some people have writers groups. We tend to have people, I've people who I talked to earlier in my career for business advice, agent advice, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird Byzantine business publishing. I mean, it functions really differently. It's hard. Sometimes people feel a little isolated. You're not sure what's happening. One of the things we do at Thriller Fest every year is I sit down with Lisa Gardner, who's another friend and a wonderful writer. And we sit down with all the debut authors and like have everyone turn their phones off. We do like a room where they can ask us any question they want about publishing with all the first year authors. And so it's a really good opportunity for people to ask all the questions like I couldn't ask when I started. I mean, I'm only 50, but I was pretty fortunate. I started my first book in college. I had a lot of luck early. But there was no internet. There was no like groups and pitch fest. And I wasn't in all the conventions. I really felt like I was kind of forging my own way. And so one of the things that's been really cool about Thriller Fest is it's an opportunity to help other writers, plug them into resources. They meet people. We have agents come in. There's really a lot more opportunities for people to understand and engage with different parts of the publishing world.
So first book you said was when you were in college. Now Orphan X is what? The series is almost 10 years old now, I believe.
Yeah, my 9th just came out called Lone Wolf.
Yeah. That about a book a year, would you say?
Yeah.
About a book a year. So about 9 years then. And you've been writing for a while. You had one other series, if I remember right, but this is obviously kind of taken a life of its own, the Orphan X series. Talk about developing the character of Evan Smoke and kind of realizing that this thing was really becoming alive in your head and to readers as well.
You know what, man? I was afraid to start writing this book. I mean, my standards were so high with series. I had all these series I loved growing up with, James Bond, Bourne, Reacher a little further along. I love Robert B. Parker, Spencer for Hire. And I thought if I wrote a series, I wanted it to at least have a chance of being in the pantheon one day with all these inspiring series characters. So I kept putting it off. I wrote like another book first and another book first. And it was just percolating in my mind. It was kind of marinating on a back burner. And it took me about 4 years before I finally sat down to write it. I needed to crack into all the things that made Evan Smoke really distinct from other series characters. An Evan Smoke action sequence and plot and mission and dialogue are all very different. That's the thing people really want. They want specificity. People come back to books. What we love, as much as plot is cool and research is cool, what we really want is character. I mean, if I ask a room full of people what their favorite James Bond action sequence is, everyone might hesitate a moment, but we all know how he takes his martini. Mm-hmm. We want to spend time with a character who does things distinctively that we recognize. And so I was really trying to evolve Evan Smoke into a full-formed character.
What did you settle on? For people that maybe haven't read the series, what are some of Evan's defining characteristics in your mind, do you say? And I guess maybe what have other readers told you that you didn't even realize that Evan Smoke was, that you were like, that maybe you've taken on and carried on?
Well, I think the first thing was I had a notion. I have a lot of friends in the Spec Ops community, former SEALs or spies or, CIA.
Yeah, give Evan's brief background quick and in your words. I mean, talk about coming out of the Orphan X training program, and that way people kind of have a grasp of what the character is as we talk about him going forward a little bit.
Yeah. So I had the notion first that what if there was a program called an orphan program, where a program buried deep in the DoD takes these kids, kind of unwanted kids, out of foster homes. Evan's taken out of a foster home in East Baltimore at the age of 12. And he's raised to be an assassin, to go places the US government cannot go, and to murder people in violation of international law. And that was sort of the first notion. But one of the big things that came to me was, well, what if instead of the usual plot, whether this is Black Widow, David Morrell played with this theme a little bit, is that it's like this horrible, he's raised in isolation, he's trained in all these ways. But I thought, what if his handler and father figure actually loved this kid who he took in? What if he was the first one to treat him like a human being? And one of the lines that Jack Johns, who is the CIA handler who he's assigned, um, becomes like a father figure to him, like I said. But he tells Evan when he's 12, the hard part won't be making you a killer. The hard part is keeping you human. And the series is very much about that. It's about Evan, who is raised in total isolation to be this assassin. He adheres to the assassin's 10 commandments. He's an incredible operator. He blends in, but he never learned how to speak what I call the strange language of intimacy. And the series is really about him trying to figure out. It's almost like when I start the series, he realizes he's an archetypal thriller hero. He realizes he's Pinocchio, but what he wants is to be a real boy. And the series is the process of him becoming.
I think one major compliment I have about Evan as a character and the way that you write him. But this job makes me do weird things sometimes. So to prepare for this podcast and to prepare for you coming, I read Orphan X, the first book in the series, and then I skipped all the way down to Lone Wolf, the last book in the series. So I had a grasp on the origin and then a grasp on what's happening now. And I think I got both Evan's development and also the fact that he's still like, it didn't feel like nothing, how do I put this? Not that nothing significant has changed, but that Evan is still who he is and he's still learning and developing. But you've also seen, you can see how that character has changed and grown in that time span that I skipped through, I guess. So I think it's really cool that you've been able to create a character that is both steady and able to like grow at the same time.
Oh, thank you. That's been a big part of it. Like as he deepens out and sees the world, as he sees himself more as a human and engages more with other people, the missions change, the stories change. He's not just like killing random bad guys. He starts to view everybody with their more human complexity. So there's a deepening out, I hope, that's happening in a texture with his character, but also with all the characters and people around him. And one of the things I did was I put him in the real world with you and I. So as much as he is this sort of heightened thriller character, he still, one of the things we never see is James Bond go home or Jason Bourne have an awkward encounter by the mail slots with the, single mother district attorney who lives downstairs who he has chemistry with. And so there's a lot of humor and fun for me that Evan will come in somewhere like bleeding with a knife cut on his arm and he gets yanked into an HOA meeting at the, apartment complex that he lives in, and they're debating the new carpet for the lobby as he's like bleeding out through his shirt. So he's seesawing back and forth between the ordinary world and this sort of heightened thriller world. And a lot of that friction is the stuff that brings out human and texture in his character and his constant burrowing towards this better understanding of what it means to be a human being.
Yeah, it's kind of like I thought of this earlier today. It's like if James Bond lived at the only murders in the building apartment complex in New York, basically, except set in LA, obviously. But like kind of the cast of characters all of a sudden brings you home. You get grounded for a second after all that like really like heart thumping, heavy breathing action that you write. You have a lot of tech stuff in this book too, and I know you said you had friends in the spec ops community. How much of the tech stuff that you write about is real and realistic, or how realistic is it? How much liberty do you take for some of this?
I tend to write, a few years into the future. I mean, what's happening is we have such an acceleration of technology right now that it feels hyperbolic. So this book, I did a lot of deep dive research into AI, some of the leading brains on AI in Silicon Valley. I'm pretty fortunate to have a pretty robust Rolodex at this point in my career. And so a lot of times my interface about what's coming, I'm ahead of the curve a little bit. And so I was able to see and project what I thought was coming and then have that be part of what's happening in the stories. I mean, I still remember back way early in my career, I think my fourth book was called The Kill Clause. And I wrote about how our cell phones have these things in them called GPS, that's global positioning satellite, and that they can keep track of your position. I still remember at the time, like the marketing department at HarperCollins was like freaking out. Like, what do you mean they can track your position with a cell phone? These things that we just utterly take for granted now.
People use that every day to stay safe, actually, like the Find My Friends app and stuff like that.
I mean, right. We take it for granted so much now that, but I wrote this whole description about how cell phones check in with towers and you track the towers. That's a plot point now. All we need to do if we're seeing a movie, let's say, is have a guy, the cop car, the lights go on behind him and he looks at his phone and throws it out the window, and we just get shorthand immediately for what that means. So I am always looking years ahead, and that's becoming more of a challenge in a positive way. But Lone Wolf dives into a lot of the questions I think about what are going to continue to define our humanity at a larger scale as these technologies continue to emerge and as artificial intelligence starts to compete with human intelligence.
Yeah, what did you learn about artificial intelligence in the process of writing this book that might not have made the page, whether for good or bad?
Well, one of the things I really wanted to do is show a way that artificial intelligence could take over, meaning could take lead over human engagement. This has been a theme I've been playing with for some time in the books. The sixth book is called Prodigal Son. And that book, I talk about how drones, a drone operator, often they go to work, let's say they're in Nevada, they'll drive to work, they'll drive through Starbucks, they'll go sit in a container, like from a container ship that's air conditioned, they'll be on remotes and they'll hunt and kill people halfway around the world. And then they'll check out for the day. They'll drive home. Their wife will call and say, "Can you pick up a carton of milk on your way home?" And one of the things that was fascinating to me was that these drone operators have just as high levels of PTSD as as soldiers who are engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Like we're just not designed to kill people, however much distance we have from it. And so one of the things that the military was doing was trying to develop a digital conscience so that humans could be out of the decision-making process completely so we can get rid of PTSD. And one of the things that Evan is up against in that book is, one of the places he comes down on is the fact that human suffering is one of the only breaks that we have on war. Like the trauma that soldiers carry, the sacrifice that parents and spouses make is one of the things that slows it. There's a line from Donald Rumsfeld. There's a wonderful documentary called The Fog of War. And he says, when you see war get this profitable, you're going to see more of it. And I hate that I had the same thought about this sort of seamlessness from suffering. In a way, the soldier suffering is what we ask of them. It's a responsibility that they courageously and willfully take on. And you can't just remove that. So I've been very interested in these sort of ethical dilemmas of what technology moves on. And in Lone Wolf, I tried to paint a scenario by which AI could take over in certain ways a large swath of engagement with the human population without somebody in the loop. And I wanted to do it plausibly and to describe how that could happen as opposed to just sort of the Skynet version from Terminator, which is fantastic, but
Yeah.
a little more of a suspension of disbelief.
So I do got to ask, how does someone who studied psychology get into this this world, the world of the military, the world of spec ops, the world of building your Rolodex in such a way that you can write well-researched books about this?
Well, I was a psychology and English major as an undergrad, in part because I thought that would be the best combination to be a novelist. I only ever wanted to be a novelist. And
Did
so
you want
a
to be a
lot of,
thriller writer for sure?
yeah,
Okay.
I loved it. Yeah, I have like,
Okay.
mysteries I wrote in fifth grade and illustrated with crayons. Like this
Yeah.
was it. And so the psychology is amazing. Literature is obvious to study literature. I never took a writing course or read writing books. I've read like 5,000 novels. I mean, like the best training is to do it. But with psychology, I don't really write techno military thrillers like Clancy. I'm really writing towards suspense and psychology and towards ethical collisions. And psychology just was a great background because when I'm writing, what I'm really trying to do with all my characters is pull on their mask and see the world through their eye holes. Like I want to know how somebody thinks and processes and what language they use and how they function is really what the aim is. And psychology is incredibly useful. And then just the dynamics between characters, manipulation and persuasion. These are all things that always captivated me from a study perspective.
And then how did you then become buddies with people that allowed you to like kind of accurately write these worlds?
It was harder early, though I had a friend from high school who had a friend who's now become one of my closest friends, who's a Navy SEAL. I wound up being the best man in his wedding. But for a time, I remember giving him a manuscript. My second book dealt with like some Navy SEAL, half like a fire squad. And they were deploying to, I think to Kosovo, and they were on a C-130 and they passed the manuscript around. So I have like notes on demolition breaching from the breacher, notes on sniping from the sniper. You know, my buddy's a 60 gunner, so he had the big gun stuff, and they all kind of edited this. And as I move forward and gotten some recognition or awareness, it's easier to reach out. But a lot of times these relationships go through, I call them kind of mafia introductions. If I need someone in the Secret Service, I'll call a buddy in the Green Berets who once did a joint op with someone in the CIA, who once roomed with, you know, a guy in the Secret Service, and they sort of vouch for you. And then they can trust you, and I can get into different, deeper level conversations than if you just talk to the PIO, that's the public information officer, say, for like a police station, because that's very legally sanctioned pellets of information, which aren't, I like the messy stuff. I like the messy and dark stuff.
Did you go undercover for one book, or is that Nick? I can't.
I went undercover into mind control cults for one of my books.
Yeah. Tell us about that. I'm sure we'll hear about it too on Thursday. But what's the high level statement of that? That seems like a kind of a crazy undergoing to choose to do a mind control cult specifically. It seems like it has some risk there.
It was amazing. It was the one thing that I had to pull back what I observed in the writing, because nobody would be able to suspend disbelief for how outlandish it is and how outlandish it feels. I did tone it down for the book rather than exaggerate and embellish it. You know, people think that mind control cults are preying on people who are from broken families, you know, who have, you know, a lot of problems, but they don't. They want very successful people, functional people in times of transition. That's why you see them recruiting at college campuses, bus stops, airports. And they want people with very healthy reactions that are predictable. They take advantage, in fact, of our emotional health, our normalcy. And so it's the same reason why a magician, if they're choosing someone from the crowd to come up and be the magician assistant on stage, they don't want to choose somebody who looks like a delusional schizophrenic, because they're going to have unusual reactions. They're going to key to different phenomenon. They're not going to follow sleight of hand predictably. And so to just give you one story, I went to this lock-in event at a Radisson by LAX, by the airport, and there's like 500 people, and they sit you in a big horseshoe so you can see everybody around. And one of the first things they say is, hey, everyone who's ready for change in their life, stand up. And when 499 people are standing up and you're sitting and they're all looking at you, it's difficult to explain the level of social pressure that's brought to bear. It's brought to bear because predictably, that's what we're designed to do. You know, if we're at a performance of a play, how many times have you been at a musical that's not that good on Broadway and everyone stands up, the tourists, for a standing ovation? You don't want to sit there and look like an angry person. We're urged often into a kind of herd mentality. And when the questions are small gradations, they just move you very slowly off the mark into different types of behavior. And so there's a very clean, fairly simple playbook for how to use mind control. So it's also going to be my backup career. If I ever get tired of writing thrillers, I'm just going to start a cult. And
very nice. All right, a couple questions here as we wrap up. One of the defining characteristics of Evan Smoke is his love for vodka, and like there are some very rich. You write vodka like George R. R. Martin writes food, I think. So can you tell us, is that something that you have a passion for too, or is this something that just you thought would be really fun to write about?
Look, I like booze a lot. I mean, my personal preference is probably bourbon, but with Evan, why I chose vodka is the process by which Evan moved from being a foster home kid who kind of nobody wanted to being purified into being like a world-class, he's an OCD, meticulous assassin, is the same process. It's mirrored in some ways by the filtration process that vodka is made. Vodka is one of the purest liquids on earth. And so in a way, I think he drinks it as a purification ceremony a bit. He rarely, I should say, drinks to excess. He's done so once. It happens to be at the beginning of Lone Wolf for reasons that everyone can understand. But he sips this thing. It's almost it's symbolic, almost the way that alchemy used to be, of turning base matter into pure. And so a lot of things in his life mirror that level of focus and discipline.
All right, and I know I actually interrupted you in the middle of your writing, so before this podcast, so I want to figure we just see if we can get a little bit of a tease about what's coming next for Evan Smoke. I know there's a great cliffhanger at the end of Lone Wolf, and obviously we don't have to talk about the spoiler of the cliffhanger. But is there? You talked about AI in this book. Is there a topic that you're examining, or another?
I'll tell you the cliffhanger that readers get to. So first of all, readers can jump in anywhere. I hope as you saw. I mean, you went.
I think yeah.
I do reset the series. Everyone gets an entry point. I mean, if you're a series reader, there's going to be Easter eggs for you in all these books as you chart his growth. But anyone can jump in anywhere. What I will say is the 10th book, the next book that's coming up, nothing's ever going to be the same after that book. I'm going to continue the series, but all 10 books come to a massive culmination after which nothing in Evan's life will be the same.
It's like the Avengers Endgame of the Orphan X series.
That's right. It's the Avengers.
All right. All right. I like that. Well, we will see you, Gregg, you and your friend Nick Petrie on Thursday, May 2nd here at the Central Library, 7 p.m. here at the Des Moines, like I said, the Des Moines Public Library's Central Library. You can learn more by going to dmpl.org/avid. That's dmpl.org/AVID. Gregg, thank you so much for chatting with us today. We really appreciated your time, and we look forward to seeing you on May 2nd.
Thank you. I can't wait to get there.